They always thought you were reacting, that your silence meant uncertainty, that your calm meant confusion, but they never realized you weren't part of their game. You were writing your own. Every move you made, every time you stepped back, every time you let them think they had the upper hand, it was all written, all intentional, because people like them crave noise. They depend on obvious wins, visible reactions, loud victories. That's what makes them predictable, and that's what makes them weak. But you've always known something they didn't. That true control isn't taken, it's designed. Quietly, over time, brick by invisible brick. They laughed when you didn't clap back, when you disappeared from their radar. They called you irrelevant, soft, finished. But they didn't see the blueprint. They didn't notice the way you stepped back, not because you fell, but because you were building altitude. You weren't lost. You were leveling. You weren't quiet. You were coding the storm. And now, they're finally starting to feel it. The shift in the room when your name comes up. The change in tone when they realize you're still here, just not where they expected, and way ahead of where they can reach. They thought time was against you, that while they climbed and posed and posted, you were stuck in the same place, forgotten, but you were never in their race. You chose distance on purpose, because when you watch long enough, people show you everything, their fears, their patterns, their blind spots, and that's where you started winning, before they even knew a game had begun. You don't need attention to gain leverage, you just need data. The silence they mocked was how you collected everything. While they obsessed over being seen, you were learning what not to become. Every loud mistake they made became a piece of your strategy. Every desperate move they posted became a map of their limits. They still think it's about catching up, but this was never a chase. This was architecture. You weren't rushing, you were calculating, and when the moment comes, you won't need to fight for space. You'll just take your seat at a table they didn't even know existed. The best part, you'll act like you've been there the whole time. Because you have. They don't see it yet. But the silence they called weakness is now the system they're trapped inside. They kept waiting for you to crack, to respond, to give them something to dissect, but all you gave them was distance. And that's what broke them. Because they expected anger. They expected drama, but you gave them strategy disguised as silence. Every time you walked away from noise, you became harder to touch. Every time you chose not to explain yourself, you became harder to read. They were loud, you were intentional, they were urgent, you were precise, and that scared them in ways they didn't have words for, because deep down they knew people like you don't move without reason. You don't waste effort. You don't speak to be heard. You speak when it counts, and when you don't speak at all, that's when they feel it the most. Your calm wasn't confusion, it was design. Your absence wasn't retreat, it was reset. They thought you vanished. You were just building where they couldn't see. Now they're scrambling to catch up to a plan they never even saw forming, one where every detail was chosen, every delay had purpose, and every quiet step brought you closer to something they can't even name yet. Now you move, but not for show. Your steps are minimal, intentional, sharp. You've learned that the loudest people often have the least direction, and the most visible paths lead to the most predictable ends. So you chose the hard route, the one that requires patience, silence, and discipline. And now it's paying off. You don't explain where you're going, you don't broadcast your milestones, but everything is moving under the surface. Connections forming, skills sharpening, focus tightening. While they scroll for validation, you sit in rooms they don't even know exist. While they count followers, you count plays. They post, you prepare. And the irony, they still think you're behind because they can't see anything. And you designed it that way. You're the ghost in their system now, the part they can't measure, the silence they can't filter out. You don't need to confront them. You've already made them nervous by existing outside their logic. This was never about proving them wrong, it was about proving your path right. And while they're chasing visibility, you're building inevitability. This is the part they never saw coming. Not the silence, not the strategy, but the fact that you're still here, stronger, colder, unreadable. You didn't break through a wall, you outgrew it, quietly, without warning. And now, you've stepped into a space they can't access, because it was never built for them, it was built by you, for you. You stopped needing applause. You stopped waiting for an understanding. You stopped playing the part they assigned you. And when that happened, you became untouchable. Let them scroll past. Let them whisper. Let them pretend they still matter in your world. You're not here to respond. You're here to execute. Everything they said would take years, you did, in silence. Everything they mocked became fuel. And now, you're moving like someone who already knows how this ends. Not because you hope it will, but because you wrote it that way. And the best part? You never raised your voice. You just raised your standard. If you're still watching, you're not one of them. Subscribe, and let them wonder what You're not avoiding them anymore. You've simply moved beyond their reach. Their conversations no longer include you, not because you were removed, but because you made yourself irrelevant to their level. You're not hiding, you're evolving, and evolution doesn't need witnesses. They operate in loops, same patterns, same games, same outcomes. But you've gone linear, forward only. No noise, no cycles, no drama. Every day you don't respond is another step they didn't take. Every decision you make in silence pulls you further from their noise and closer to your purpose. Now they talk about you in past tense, like you faded out, but here's what they missed. You didn't fade, you filtered. You didn't disappear, you just built a wall they'll never climb. They kept looking for proof of your struggle, for signs that you'd lost something, but they couldn't find it. Because what you were building wasn't visible yet. It wasn't made for eyes like theirs. It was made for endurance, not performance. And by the time they see it, it'll be too late to catch up. Because by then, you'll be too far and too quiet to follow. Now they feel it, not from what you say, because you still don't say much, but from what shifts when you enter the room, from the way people start to watch you differently, from how the conversations pause when your name is mentioned. This isn't intimidation, it's presence, and it was earned in silence. Because while they built identities from attention, you built one from precision. You weren't looking to impress, you were building something undeniable. And now they feel that. It's in your walk, your stare, your refusal to over-explain. You used to be underestimated. Now you're undefined. And that makes you more dangerous than any version of yourself they thought they knew. They want to know your next move. You don't make moves. You shift environments. You don't chase power. You become the reason others reposition. This is what they couldn't measure. How stillness becomes pressure. How silence becomes signal. And how someone who doesn't demand attention ends up commanding all of it. They still don't get it, because they're still too loud to hear it. They thought visibility meant dominance, that being seen equaled being ahead. But while they chased the spotlight, you studied the shadows. You understood early that the loudest wins often age the fastest. So you stayed underground, learning patterns, refining control, building what couldn't be clapped for because it wasn't ready to be seen. And now it doesn't need to be, because you didn't grow to be noticed. You grew to become necessary. They still think you're preparing, unaware that what they call the climb was actually the finish. You're not getting started. You've arrived. The only difference is they just found out. They're reacting to results you planned for in silence, trying to decode a formula that never needed approval. While they were addicted to impressions, you built infrastructure. While they rushed to show progress, you mastered restraint. What you built isn't loud. It doesn't post. It doesn't explain. It doesn't respond. And that's exactly why it's untouchable. Because it lives beneath noise. Because it exists without needing to perform. You didn't ask for their validation. You engineered distance. And now they call it mystery. They think you're unpredictable, but you've been consistent the whole time. Just out of reach by design. They keep watching now, silently, carefully. But it's too late for questions, and way too late for access. The path you took was never meant for them. It was narrow, quiet, and brutal. It didn't reward attention. It punished weakness. And you walked it alone. Not because you had to, but because you chose to. Because isolation brings clarity. Because distance lets you see the full board. And now, you do. They're still measuring progress by what's posted, still chasing numbers, still building in public. But you've moved on. You don't chase, you design. You don't react, you set the rhythm. And the rhythm is silence. Controlled, deliberate silence. The kind that makes people lean in without realizing they're being pulled. Now they echo your words without knowing. They mimic your timing. They try to bottle what you embody. But this was never about imitation. What you built can't be copied because it wasn't made for attention. It was made for control. Silent control. Enduring control. The kind of control that never has to raise its voice to take over a room. You don't stand above them. You stand beyond them. They keep watching now, silently, carefully. But it's too late for questions, and way too late for access. The path you took was never meant for them. It was narrow, quiet, and brutal. It didn't reward attention. It punished weakness. And you walked it alone, not because you had to, but because you chose to. Because isolation brings clarity. Because distance lets you see the full board. And now, you do. They're still measuring progress by what's posted, still chasing numbers, still building in public. But you've moved on. You don't chase. You design. You don't react. You set the rhythm, and the rhythm is silence. Controlled, deliberate silence. The kind that makes people lean in without realizing they're being pulled. Now they echo your words without knowing. They mimic your timing. They try to bottle what you embody. But this was never about imitation. What you built can't be copied, because it wasn't made for attention. It was made for control. Silent control. Enduring control. The kind of control that never has to raise its voice to take over a room. You don't stand above them. You stand beyond them.